There are adults out there who or older generations that really do want to work with the youth generation and want to give them platforms to give more back and to create a future with them. We've always had the change makers there. In every generation we have who's tried to do it. It is very interesting how your generation has actually leaped that over to be, oh no, we're not stopping. We're gonna go do it. We're gonna make the change.
Everyone says Gen Z is too sensitive or too fragile, especially about mental health and social justice. But why do you think adults constantly and consistently dismiss our emotional struggles as overreaction?
Because we as adults, okay, so we're talking Gen Z, millennials, and Gen Alphas, right? The generation right above that, Gen Z and millennial, is probably my generation and the generation above me. And we as adults have always been taught to suck it up. Like we've been just, there's no confusion in this, right? And sometimes it's even if we don't suck it up, there's threateningness to it, right? Oh my God, don't give your emotions, don't say something. But the fact is, you're taught, your generations, like, the Gen Zs, millennials, and alphas, is to speak it out, is to talk about it, is for many of them, silence, like for many of us in our generation, it was silence was survival. If we kept quiet, kept our head down, and get our work done, and I'm not even just speaking immigrants, I'm speaking in general. It was get to the place you want to get, but you get going. You just keep moving. Gen Zs don't do that naturally. The millennials don't do that naturally. They misread the fact that, weakness is actually wisdom. So it's not like we're weak. You have taught us, and actually you're teaching yourselves that if we're weak or if we feel like we don't know something, go learn it. Go figure it out. Go find out about it. So I always say this, I say, because I learned this from the kids and from your generation, fragility is actually fluency. And so you're emotionally literate in a way that previous generations haven't been. And I think that's the cool part of learning from your generation simultaneously while we are communicating with you. So I think this is actually a very powerful thing because it's a real issue that everyone keeps saying, oh, Gen Z is too sensitive. And the older generations actually were never allowed to be sensitive. Sensitivity was considered bad. I'm just going to say it plainly, it was considered bad. And if you cried, then you were weak. But now we're actually told to cry openly, create emotional regulations, talk about it. And not because we're saying, we actually say, let's celebrate your courage. Let's not dismiss it. And that's not because you're wrong, but that's because we were never taught that this was okay to do, and that was the important part of that. Um, you know, here is what I tell adults, right? The parents and the corporate people and the HR people is Gen Z is not asking for perfection. They're asking to be heard. And if we stop labeling emotional honesty as weakness, we're just learning this is a life-changing thing for this generation. And it could become life-changing for multiple generations to come. So I think what you're modeling, what we call softness, right? It's actually strength. And that's the new language you guys use for us to be it. We're not coming out of our mind frame that we were raised in or guided in. And, I hear this a lot from the kids and the youth, and you're 27 and under. And the word needs to be right now. And the change has to be right now. I love how a lot of adults say it. I can't change anymore. Well, you can. You just don't want to.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And you said something interesting. Well, everything you said was interesting, but you said something kind of that I wanted to double click on, which is you said that we misread, like Gen Z misread something, millennials misread something. Obviously, we know exactly what they misread, which is being sensitive, but how did they misread that? How did they learn to misread that? Was it an accident or was that a choice?
Are you asking me the Gen Z's misread it or the adults misread it?
Oh, we can go both. How did Gen Z misread that?
So I don't think Gen Z misread it. I think Gen Z recognized it. I think the adults misread it, right? I think that's what I was and if I didn't say it clearly, but so when the adults see Gen Z doing it so naturally, right? Talking about their emotions, giving out, the information they want, which normally adults can't do, the adults have misread it as weakness. In actuality, for you, it's wisdom. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what the problem is. I don't think the Gen Zs have misread it. I think the Gen Zs have glorified it. I think we look at it as you're sad and you're crying, so you're weak. You're complaining, so you're a complainer. You're not going with the flow of what we're supposed to do, and you're trying to do something different. Now you're a what is the word I'm trying to use? You're an outsider, a snowflake, right? So, but in reality, it's actually opening doors to conversations that I have to believe truly we wanted to do when we were your age, but we were not taught that.
Speaking of this, another thing that Gen Z are always called is entitled, or we're avoiding hard work. We're called the quiet quitters. Well, we're in a really turbulent economic crisis right now. We're in this turbulent environmental crisis. A lot of our work options are dwindling with AI. But regardless of those contemporary things, Gen Z have been called this way before 2022. We've been called this ever since we were even able to get a job. What is that criticism from adults? Is that the same thing as a sensitivity, or is there another layer to dig into?
I think again it goes with the natural path of life that the adults or the adults older than us, I guess you want to say the boomers, all the generational names get me all confused all the time, just so you know. So I'm going to say I'm the generation right before the Gen Zs and the millennials, right? So my generation and above has always been taught this is the way it's going to be and this is the way it should be. You can't change it or you shouldn't change it. We've always had the change makers there. In every generation we have who's tried to do it. It is very interesting how your generation has actually leaped that over to be oh no, 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 we're not stopping. We're gonna go do it. We're gonna make the change. So when we talk about the entitlement issue or avoid, I hear that a lot too. I come from healthcare, right? So it's an interesting story. Doctors who did residency for many, many hours. Now I have friends who are attendees and who are senior physicians who are like, oh, now the new residents are coming in and they're telling the HR people we're only going to work this much. So I want to be honest with you. I don't think this is an entitlement issue. I think this is a thing I call chance to breathe. Okay, so now what do I mean by that? Gen Z isn't lazy. You're not as exhausted as we are. Okay? You're facing a world, right, that's on fire. I feel like that's why I say you're trying to plant these seeds in different ways. That's not avoidance. It's survival with style. I had actually a young girl tell me this was. She goes, she came in for an interview with a friend of mine, and she was like, no, 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 I'm not trying to sit here and work 60 hours and do this. I want to survive. I want to have a great life, but I'm going to do it in style. I was like, that's brilliant. I wouldn't have had the guts to tell my attendee that ever in my life. So many adults like they miss these rules, right? We have rule. Nobody wants to change the rules. Nobody wants to change the wages. Nobody wants to change the debt. We complain about it a lot, right? But we don't want to do any changes. So we let's just say we're talking about specifically hard work, right? You're redefining the way you work. And I tell that to all of my corporates and all my HR people. First, I say, have you asked the question what their expectation is, right? So we have this problem when we're going in for a job interview. This is what you're supposed to say. This is how you're supposed to act. And this is what you're supposed to do, right? But the Gen Zs, the millennials are, well, why? Why can't I do it this way? I will get the work done. I will make sure it's convenient. I will make sure, but then I can also have this time and space. And we, the adults, are like, what do you mean you have time and space? What do you mean you don't want to work hard? No, no, no. We didn't say we're not working hard. We're just doing it efficiently. What's wrong with efficiency? I think that's fantastic. Why do I have to have my head like my husband always says, okay, my head's cut off like a chicken and running around. Why do you have to do that? And that's what I see your generation doing. So your care about the impact is not just income, it's lifestyle, right? You're about balance, not burnout. Why do we have all these books on mommy burnout, this burnout, that burnout? Why do none of you read those books? It's our generation, right? Right? It's us saying that. So it's not laziness. I go back to the same word. It's wisdom.
Wisdom. That's brilliant, honestly. Yeah, my generation, well, if we read books, it's usually listening to audiobooks, but
Right. It's not
the
reading.
point
I mean,
still
I listen
stands.
to audiobooks too now. I like stick it in my ear. I'm cooking. I'm doing that. Like, I mean, I do the same thing.
100%. Just if we're staying on the honesty, I know you and I talked about me going from, being a supporter of Gen Z to maybe being a little nuanced and being more abrasive or taking another stance. Is there any intimidation from your end on being in a generation that doesn't necessarily adopt these things as fast as Gen Z? Or is there a lot of inspiration from your generation?
So I think that comes, so intimidation, yes. I wish I could be more efficient like the way you guys are. I think my mentality or people within my generation or the generation above me want to change, but it's hard, right? It's you're so used to something. This is how it's supposed to be. Do we want to change? I'm pretty sure there's 90% want to change. There's probably 30% that actually do the change. I feel like you're the inspiration for my generation because I'm looking at you going, wow, you make it look so easy. But is that bad? Right? I'll step back and be like, wait, I'm not working hard enough. I feel like I need to do more. But why? I'm accomplishing the same amount of stuff I want to do. But that I think is the inspiration. Now, do you feel inspired by us? I hope you do, but I think we have to have a different communicative way of creating that inspiration for you. Because right now, all I hear from your generation, the millennial generation, the generation alpha is we don't think you care what we think anyways. You already have a implemented idea about our generations. So why should we trust you? We're just going to keep going the way we want to go. So I think it's both ways, right? I hope as Dr. Z, and I'm bringing this program, Listen to the Kids to the World, um, I am an inspiration to you. My inspiration is I am that bridge between our generations. So we can create that new communication and together we can create a future for you guys. Not for you guys, like which we've always seen. Like the adults are like, here it is, here's the package, go work or go do your life. I think that's what we want to do. And in that time frame, can we create a different life for us as we grow older?
I love the word that you used, which is bridge, because that's exactly where I want to go. It's this thing of like it's not just a one-way bridge, but it's a two-way
No.
bridge where you have to teach the older generations how to teach Gen Z, and Gen Z have to teach themselves how to listen to the older generations, and that becomes a recursive thing. So again, putting you on the spot just for a second, how do we teach Gen Z how to listen to the older generations? How do we have that conversation with them?
Well, I think it goes both ways. I think listening is a tactic that we have totally forgotten. I think two human beings, I don't care if you're 9 years old, if you're 11 years old, if you're 15 years old, if you're 20 years old, if you're 30 years old, I can keep going on. People don't know how to listen to us in general. When you're listening, right, there is a science to it too, technology. Like psychologically, if you want to hear someone talk, you and I are having a conversation within a 1 minute span, you will always be interrupted 3 times. Because what is human nature say? I want to hear myself talk. And also, if someone's asking me for advice, naturally we should be quiet and listen. But naturally, what happens is we want to give our input. So we could give advice. And this happens parent and child, teacher and student, boss and like it's always like, let me fix it for you, right? So listening is a problem. Now, if we're not guiding our generations under us like yours, or how are you going to listen to us if we don't listen to you? It's a two-way streak. Mostly I hear from your generations, I keep hearing you guys talk, but no one's hearing me talk. So it has to go both ways, right? So we have to start making that change that when we are actually communicating with someone, we stay quiet for 1 minute, we listen to the conversation, we let them repeat their most important points that they need to make, and then we speak and we repeat first back to them what is those points they're making, and then if we have questions, we ask that, and then we say, do you need me to answer something or would you like me to just listen to you? But it has to go both ways. Eventually, it naturally will start happening, but it's a very hard thing to do because naturally people don't want to listen to each other. They want to be the leader of the pack, which is not a bad thing. Listening actually creates leadership, but you want to do it in the most empathetic and most kindest way so you could actually have a two-way conversation, not just a one-way conversation. So I think it's for both generations. It's not just for yours. I think we all have to learn to create a listening pattern for ourselves.
And this is the perfect segue to what we're here to do, which is, or talk about, which is listening to the kids or listen to the kids. Um, First of all, how realistic is it to listen to kids? That feels like asking the world of a generation that doesn't even like listening to themselves. So, how do we begin that conversation with adults? And from your perspective and from your experience, how does that conversation go usually?
What we do at Listen to the Kids, the program, um, and we basically take different categories of peers, right? Of kids. We'll take the younger generation, which is Generation Alpha. We'll sit with Generation Z, or we'll sit with millennials. It depends on who you are under 27. And we create a peer-to-peer conversation. We pick topics and we literally have an open-ended conversation, unjudgmentally, quietly. If you remember, when you're in school, you have the stick. If you're holding the stick, you talk. If you don't, it's really going back to that. Okay. So why is it important? Because we are still dominating as adults what children are supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. And if they remember themselves when they were the youth and they were the kids, if they did have someone listen to them, it could be different. But since they didn't, they're now doing the same patterns that their generations above them were doing. Okay. Every generation has had like I said, a change maker, a developer, somebody who wanted to make a change. But they were always shut down because the adults would say, no. Well, what if the adults come on board with your generation and say, wait a minute, let's get on board and make this change? Because when you start listening to the kids, you're creating a new way of communication, a greater way of connection. And more importantly, these listings will create empowerment and leadership within themselves. Because right now, across the board, the youth is saying, no one's listening to us. You're handing us this whirlwind of a world that you have destroyed. And now you're like, here, fix it. But you're still making the same mistakes. So the empowerment in that is, wow, they could actually trust us adults. Because as young as 7 years old, I hear, we don't trust our teachers. They're not going to do anything. There's no disciplinary action. Now you go to middle school. Now you go to high school. Now you go to college. Now you go to work. It's the same conversation over and over again. So who's telling the conversation? Is it the adults or is it the youth? What if we actually sit down and do it together and have that conversation? Because that would be the most important part of it, is to create that. Do the adults trust them and want to listen? No, majority of the time, 90% don't. But if we do, what is that going to harm you by doing? Maybe they'll trust you, adults. I will say 95% of the time, once you launch a listening to the kids conversation or a conversation with the youth, it will multiply tenfold as you keep doing it over and over again. And they will trust you more. But again, you have to be quiet, you have to be unjudgmental, and you have to hear them before you speak. So that's really, I think, the roundabout answer to how to do this. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have to acknowledge the fact that it's really difficult. There's no easy answer. There's no kind of black and white on and off solution. It's just not struggling with it, but going with the flow of the complexity of the situation. I want to double click on this whirlwind of a world. Gen Z are given this, again, we're born into this. A lot of the times people talk about not asking to be raised in this. How can we reframe that psychology of, sure, you didn't ask to be born in this, but you can still change that? Whose responsibility is that? Is it Gen Z? Is it the older generations? Is it a collaborative project? How can we change that cultural staple of a conversation?
So I think that staple of a conversation again goes back to communication, right? If you as the generation keep saying, the youth generation keeps saying, we're handed this work, but they're also saying simultaneously, we want to be part of the resolution too. But you're not hearing us. You're just saying, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a kid. You're not educated. You're not there. But we've seen in the last 5 years since COVID, right? The youth has been speaking up more, whether we're protesting, whether we're talking. We have governments shutting down our friends. We're telling the youth generation you can't go to college. We're fighting for our own generation. Like, you guys are fighting for your generation and going out there. But the adults are just like, no, you guys don't know what you're talking about. We've had this way all the time. And it has to be both ways. You guys have to be open to having the conversation and not making it political or but making it personal because they're going to be gone one day, the adults, and you have to fix it. But they have to be open. The adults have to be open to sitting down and at a table with you and say, okay, you may actually have the newer things that we don't know about. We can't go backwards. We have to go forwards. And the adults have to open up that mind to them.
Yeah, I will say two things on that. Number one, I feel like, again, taking another stance, Gen Z suffer from the knight in shining armor syndrome, where they just expect things to be solved. Not for lack of trying, by the way, and I think that there is a really good topic to be discussed on how Gen Z have tried and failed and just given up on certain things, but we can get to
Right.
that. And another thing, one thing I learned in therapy is that, just between two individuals, but we can abstract it on two generations or a multi-generational thing, is communication versus comprehension. You can
Mm-hmm.
communicate all you want, but if the other person is going to comprehend you in a way that doesn't conform to what you want to say or interpret you in a way that doesn't make any sense for the context of the
Right.
situation is not going to be solved. How do we struggle and balance with this comprehension and communication problem? Is it something that we can teach to people, or do we just have to, you know, conform in some way?
I don't think we need to conform. I think conforming is too easy. I think we've done that our whole lives. I think my generation has, the generation before me has. I think what I get inspired by from your generation is you guys are communicating, you're communicating. Now, the knight in shining armor piece or, giving up piece happens with any human psychology, right? You can't, if you keep trying, you keep trying to, I think if you give up and you don't go find another direction, I will tell you, there are adults out there who, or older generations that really do want to work with the youth generation and want to give them platforms to give more back and to create a future with them. I think that's there. I would say just don't give up. That's one thing. Or come to the right adult or come to the right older generation person and say, look, this is what I want to do. Can you guide me to who to go to? Because I truly believe your generations and the generations below you are just looking for guidance. I think the problem is they get frustrated when they're told what to do. That's where we get this conformity, and that's where we get that's not comprehensive, right? You're communicating and you're saying, this is what I'm looking for. And that other person you're communicating with isn't comprehending. They're saying, okay, here's what you need to do. Well, that's not what I'm trying to do. But again, it goes back to making slow changes, right? You have to slowly make these changes because, and you have to find the right person. And a lot of your generation, which I feel like isn't trying to do but does do, is they get the door shut in their faces. I go back to something I heard Tina Knowles say at a luncheon we were at, that she taught her daughter, and the girls in her life. She said, you just got to kick the door out. Just kick the door out. Kick it down and keep going forward. And you'll find someone. You will find someone who wants to do something for you.
There's a lot of, again, we talked about intimidation, but we talk about, mommy burnout, daddy burnout. These books never existed for, my generation doesn't read these books, right? Because they don't suffer from these things. But if we're talking about these books and these pieces of media and these artifacts, we also have never had or been forced to read so much about a generation. Like baby boomers are never forced to understand so much about millennials in order to work with them, but they're forced to understand so much about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. How do we deal with this kind of like question or hesitation or confusion of, hey, how did this generation become so different? Why do I have to understand so much about this generation just to work with them? It also feels unfair, just to take another stance, for the older generations because they've grown up in a very static world. Now the internet comes along, things change so quickly, and now they're forced to redefine everything about them. How do we deal with that?
Okay, so I'm going to take one step back. All these books you're talking about, who's written them? Has your generation written them? Has Gen First of all, Gen Alpha can't. They're so young, right? Have the millennials written it about you guys? Why are people who are not in your generation writing books about you? How do these? This is kind of my forte that I say all the time. The experts don't know you unless they sit down and have a conversation with you. You've got all these books about social media, about child welfare, about, psychologists and psychiatrists. And I'm not writing a book about that. I'm writing about your stories. I'm sitting down with you and writing your stories and then giving the adults the guidance. I'm not sitting here trying to define that we have to read. Well, why are they reading the books that their generation are writing about you? Have you read the book? Because I read the book. The book is only saying the same thing. How about one of you guys sit down and write the book about you guys? Or put the show together about you guys? Not have the experts on the panels who are in their 50s, 60s, 40s, who are not part of your generation, but I'll also think they know what they're talking about to you. But I think it's the same conversation that the older generations had about those generations. So it was the boomers having it about the generation. Again, the generation names confuse me. The boomers having it about our generation, and then you had another generation. Nobody sat with us. Nobody put us on the panel. I want you guys on the panel. I want you to sit with those experts and say, no, that's not what, no, that's wrong. That's not what our generation's about. Nobody wants to have the conversation with you guys. I want to have the conversation with you guys. I want to put you on the panels. I want to have conferences where I have, I don't want to say all the names, but like the Jonathan Hyatt with you talking about AI and social media and how to get parents to actually not buy their kid a phone or not give them social media by 16. Guess who needs to have it, Ayush? It's your generation that needs to sit with those kids to do it. Not the 80-year-old man or the 70-year-old or the 60-year-old or these celebrities. It is the kids who have actually gone through that should be telling the younger kids that. So the books are written by the people who are not part of your generation. And that's why they're looking. I'm 47 years old this year. I would read a book that another psychologist writes about your generation, but there's no conversation with your generation. It's only what psychology, psychiatry, medicine has told us over and over again. And I am listening to this conversation in this book based on the interpretation that this individual has seen maybe 12 patients or 15 patients or 50 patients and using that conversation. But every child is different. Every youth is different. I can't compare you to another 25-year-old who lives in a different neighborhood, has a different upbringing, it's all different. But to do all of this, to learn and to understand your generation, we have to, one, communicate with you. And why do we do it? Is because we actually have to open up our eyes that, like you said, times have changed. My dad used to say to me, times change every year, but people don't. And I said, I disagree now. Times have changed and people have changed because what is at your fingertips was not at my fingertips. What is at your fingertips is new at my children's fingertips. My nieces and nephews' fingertips. I have a nephew. He's in law school and he's working in a law firm. That kid in the last 2 years has never spent a day in California. He's in Paris working. I'm like, if I could have lived that life and worked everywhere around the world and still get paid for it. He's 24 years old. He's living his life. He's paying his wages. He's doing everything he wants. And I have to tell you, I am extremely jealous. He's living right now in Texas and he's like, lives with his friends, works here, gets paid in California. And I'm like, you were in Europe for a year and you worked for an American firm, but he could do that. And I'll bet you, I haven't asked adults this, I bet you they're as jealous as well. They're like, I wanted to live that life. We did this like 1 year break, or some kids did. I didn't get that, but but that's the thing. And he is a African American, half Indian young man who comes from an immigrant father. But that's the point. He made it work. He still works hard. He still lives his life. But now, how did I learn all about this and how did I understand him? It's by sitting and talking to him. The books aren't going to explain it to the adults. I have to tell you that. I know you want me to say, why do they have to read the books? But the books aren't going to explain it to them. They're only going to get a perception of what that author who is from that age group is interpreting what they are saying about you. I would challenge you to read one of those books and challenge one of those authors to come on here and say, how do you know that about us? And say, that's actually incorrect.
Do you think that they would be even open to being told that they are incorrect?
No. No, because nobody wants to feel that. I want to hear I'm incorrect because I want to learn still. Again, I'm saying no because I'm basing this off of, a bigger picture here. I think if they are a great educator, if they want to learn about the generation and they want to correct themselves and they want to do more, they would be open to having the conversation. If they don't, then they're not the people who are going to change their opinion about your generation or the generation below you. That's the sad part.
No, I love this, explanation of the fact that the media that other generations are consuming about us does not supersede the necessary conversations they need to have with us. And right
Yeah.
now, you're one of the few people that's, talking about the conversations and living the conversations. So what have you come to the conclusions of with conversations surrounding Gen Z? You've talked to so many.
Yeah.
What interesting things have you found out?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm constantly at awe of you guys. Like, and it's not just Gen Z, it's Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and Millennial. Am I getting that right? I feel like I always get it wrong, the order. Um, I walk away smarter, sharper, understanding what real leadership could look like if we listen to you guys. How to open up a larger conversation, not make it so one is on top and there's this whole lot. Like I learned how to create a collaborative conversation. It puts me in awe because I'm like, I worked in corporate America, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in education, and I'm like, and I still see the potential that your generation can create such change, right? So I'm going to give you a couple examples of conversation. So I had an 11-year-old and she said something to me. She goes, I don't want adults to fix things for me. I want them to see me. And I'm going to say this, that hasn't changed from generation to generation. Adults never see the youth because they push them to the side. They said, let me just do this and then I will bring you in. That one sentence actually stayed with me for a long, long time because it's a deeply thing known how kids actually feel in every generation. There's another 14-year-old boy who talks about mental health within his middle school. And he was like, this was about 2.5 years ago. And his dad and him were talking about how there was not a lot of mental health activities in schools. And this was on the East Coast. And what they did was they created their own mental health program in the school. He created a meditation center. And the school, he was lucky that the school went along with it, but they started after school a little bit. Then they did it. Then he created this whole space. And he said, no one else was doing it, so I just did it. I was like, I wouldn't have done that. When I was your age, I wouldn't have done that. And I think there was a fear also. There was a huge fear, um, of doing something because I would have been shut down. Your generation doesn't care if they're shut down. They'll find a different way to do it. So I think that puts me very, and I think what surprises me the most about even the older generation, like I want to say the Gen Zs and the millennials, is it's not about how much pain or pressure you guys feel. It's how clear, how articulate, and how generous you are to your own truths. The authenticity blows me away. I think we are learning now. I'm 40, right? So like they're the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds. They're learning now those things. If we learned it in our 20s and younger, or maybe like under 30 and younger, I think we would have been a different generation. You're authentically doing it, and you're also doing it without feeling like you would be dismissed or doubted. You know, you're building those bridges that I wanted to help you do with the adults, right? You're doing it within your own generation, right? There's no judgment. There's no, hey, I walked out of the house wearing this. Who cares? Like nobody in our generation, if you walked out like this, like, and I have to catch myself. I do it with my daughter. She's like, who cares? So let me wear what I want to wear. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, oh, I did it. I got to stop because I do it still, And she's like, yes, there are certain rules she has to follow. She's a dancer, right? So when you go to the studio, there is a look you have to have, right? But when she's at school, she's like, I'm like, okay. I mean, we had Punky Brewster, who I loved. I grew up with her. She didn't care, but there was not many of that. You guys have so much of that. And that's what I want us to learn, you know? Because we're probably closer to you guys than maybe the 60s and the 70-year-olds, right? Which is a whole different generation. Um, and I said, with building the bridges, it's really interesting because you still want to create the connection with us. You still want to try to help fix that connection between us. And I think that's what Listen to the Kids, our program does is we've seen that when we hand you a mic, right? When we hand you a platform, you guys don't use it to scream like adults do. I feel a lot of adults just scream. Um, you use it to teach. You use it to heal. You use it to imagine and give a better world to us or to the younger generation. And you're not asking adults to step aside like adults are asking you to step aside. You're asking us to step up to the plate and be beside you. That is what this is really creating this awe in me because I never felt adults wanted me on their side. They wanted to push me away. And that brings me full circle to my conversation, which is Listen to the Kids actually creates that for us. Again, it goes back to building that bridge between the two generations or the 3 or 4 generations, whatever you want to say.
Every generation, it's a
Every
cross-generational
generation.
bridge.
It's cross. Yeah.
One thing that we should absolutely insert into this is technology. We talk about people don't change or things change every year. People don't change, but people are changing. And technology is one of the largest things that has to do with that. How is technology affecting or impacting Listen to the Kids? Is it a positive? Is it a negative? Can we learn something from it?
Okay, so I'm gonna break this up, right? I am not intelligent with technology, first of all. I'm
I disagree.
I know you do. But when we talk about technology is moving so fast. It's so fast. And it's both. I feel like my husband said this to me yesterday. He goes, it's a megaphone and it's a maze. In general, when I'm just saying in general technology, it is loud, it is out there, and then it's like you've got to navigate it in so many different ways if you don't understand it, right? But I think technology gives Gen Z tools to amplify their voices that we didn't have, right? That our generations didn't have. You're like I said, it goes back to building communities, speaking out, creating influential things, you doing the podcast, understanding AI. You're not just scrolling, which again, social media is very different, right? Like there's a lot of things that I speak on. I say, I think it's a conversation in the home when you should get a phone. I think children under the age of 16 are not mentally ready for social media because one, their parents don't understand social media. I'm going to be very honest. And secondly, I think social media has to have a great brain development because there's a lot of things we don't understand about it that will affect a child's brain and their social emotional, their emotional wellness, their ability. I mean, there's just so much. I think it's a new version of so many things that we had in magazines and TV and billboards, but those were kind of controlled. This is an uncontrolled space for under 16. Um, Going back to scrolling, because I say your generation, I want to say 17 and above, right? You're not just scrolling social media. You're now different. You understood it in the beginning, but now you're a little more mature. So you're organizing it, you're educating with it, you're healing with it, you're venting it, you're vomiting it. You're creating environments within your own lives within technology. So it's not just social media for you guys. It's social media, it's AI, it's I don't even know half the words. I mean, you could say them more than I can, but at the same time, technology also can become overwhelming. And for when we talk about social media, it's the notifications, the comparisons, the not ability to understand what you're looking at. Um, we used to say in commercials, right? Back in the day, like TV shows and commercials, there were subliminal messages. YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest. I don't know what you like. I don't know. Instagram. They all still have subliminal messages. They're just done differently psychologically. So that becomes the safety factor, right? That we have a concern about. Do you think we knew that when we handed you guys phones and social media? No. Do you know that better? Yes. That's where I go back to that conversation where your generation, the under 30s, 18 to 30 years old, have the ability to help that younger youth generation not make those same mistakes, right? We, the older generation, say, hey, we want to help you so you don't make our same mistakes. But that's where that communication starts, right? But again, our mistakes were different, your mistakes were different. We can help the younger one by creating that listening aspect. Um, I also think technology isn't an enemy. I really want to make sure of that because technology has its advancements. Disconnection, yes, right? Technology can be a disconnection, but systematically, we bridge gaps through technology right now. Kids around the world can communicate. We had pen pals, we used to write letters. There's video chatting now. You can talk to someone in a third world country that you could build a friendship with through FaceTime, through all these WhatsApps and all this kind of stuff. So Gen Z needs isn't the restrictions, it's wisdom. Again, that word keeps coming up. You have wisdom that we don't. And I think if you wrote a book on technology based off of what Jonathan Hyatt did on social media and phones, you could probably give some different advice. I would highly recommend you read Jonathan Hyatt's book, The Anxious Generation, right? He wrote about your generation. But I don't know if he actually had a conversation with your generation. It's called the anxious generation. He labeled you guys as that. And I don't think that was fair because I think you guys give us wisdom on understanding this stuff. He doesn't use the technology the way you guys do. So I think that is important because adults who model healthy behavior, their children will model healthy behavior. Your generation, if it models healthy behavior technology, the generation below you will model healthy behavior. I think, let's be honest, kids aren't the only one glued to their phones or to the apps, you know? And I think that really is the challenge, is the tool, is that you have to give us wisdom on it too. I think you're part of that solution for us as well.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. You know, when I was writing my book, which is similar to Jonathan Haidt's work, it was it was popping up in my mind that nobody really talked to my generation about who we are and what we do using social media, how we grew up with social media, the nuances of using it. They just talked about it like everybody uses social media the same. I think it's a very personal experience the way somebody uses social media. And
Right.
then again, to put myself on the spot, when I was talking to you about it, I actually brought up the fact that in my book, I recommended that people pay attention to the way that they use TikTok and Instagram and maybe, move away from it. And you pushed back and you said no, because the people that you've talked to in different kinds of communities use it as businesses. Can you explain exactly what you were talking about?
So I had a 22-year-old young girl who we had a conversation with, and this was at the time when they were thinking they were going to ban TikTok, which I have no idea where that is at now. I feel like the government constantly is doing things that I have to catch up with in my brain, um, like your generation. But she had a conversation with me, and she was like, "Dr. Z, you know what my fear is? I'm 22 years old. I'm going to college. She was in community college. She graduated from high school. She launched a business. And I feel like I want to say it was like a candle business or a perfume business or something. And she's creating her own income to help her pay for college, to help her parents out. And I was like sitting there going, at 22, I don't know what, I know I was in med school, but I know my parents are paying for it. I mean, that's entitlement. I'm going to tell you, like, your generation is creating its own marks, its own planes. And they're like, if you take TikTok away from me, that's my only source of marketing, getting my business on online and doing, because there's no more billboards, getting into retail. I can tell you, I was a toy industry person. Getting into retail is not an easy task. And when you make something and you're making it at a MSRP of 50 bucks, at retail you're selling it to them at 25. That means you're not making anything. When you're doing your own small business and you're creating it and selling it to the consumer directly, you're actually making an income off of that. You know? Because that's what investment is. That's what you put into that. So this young girl was like, you take social media away from me, I don't have a business anymore. Instagram, TikTok, I think LinkedIn, all of these were the places where she was marketing who she was as a businesswoman and her business. So again, I will go back to adults have to be adults before you hand a kid a phone and you hand them social media. Be part of your children's lives, people here. Okay, like let's have these conversations. If you are 16 and above and you have a phone and you're on social media, Still, adults, let's have a conversation. Your children are still mimicking what you're doing. If you're sitting on a phone or on a computer or something every day, all the time, they're going to do the same thing because no one's having these conversations with these kids. And then the second part of this is, or excuse me, the third part of this is you can't take things away when people are actually building something from it. Technology is not going away. This is a marketing tool for businesses. And younger children, I call them children because I'm older. You guys are still kids to me, but are creating massive economical businesses, not only just for this country, but for countries around the globe. It's fantastic. Period pads. College students are building, nonprofits. They're creating mental health. Like USC did that whole mental health thing with the bucket. If social media wasn't there, it wouldn't get the word out about it. So there is good and bad to this, but there has to be a place where we have to have the right tools to give guidances to the younger generation and also the older generation, not push them to say that they're using it for the wrong things when some of them, majority of them are probably using it for the right things too.
This is such a fascinating point that I really want to hone in on because you said it beautifully and perfectly, and you've really changed my mind on this. But I had never considered the economic proximity or the
Mhm.
proximity to economic contribution that Gen Z have because they don't have to go to the analog world and register a business and go to all these places. They can just open TikTok and begin marketing in that way. And in any country, right? It's not just designated to
Yeah,
reserved to one country.
there are laws still. I got to be careful with that. I have a CPA as a husband. He's going to beat me if I don't say it correctly. There may be, if you have to register as a business, you probably still have to pay taxes. There's probably things you have to do. So I wouldn't say you can't just open something up, but I think there is a place that you have a possibility to see if something's going to work before you create a really strong business. And that is what you guys get to do, you know? And you get to spread the word globally. We didn't have that.
Yeah. The
That's
barrier
a
to entry.
yes, 1,000%.
So low, so low. And again, so I'm on Gen Z side now, take a step back and go against them just for a second. We're talking about social media. And one of the things that I experienced in the last, not that I experienced it, but I observed it in my generation in the last handful of years, let's say last 7 years, is their use of social media for cancel culture. And a lot of older generations are very scared of this. They don't want to be canceled. Obviously, cancel culture is very political, but we can push politics to the side and just talk about the sociological aspect of it. I guess socio-technological aspect, but we don't
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
into
No, no, I
dig
get
into
it.
the weeds. How do we reframe this idea of cancel culture being this amazing filter for the generation? We're just looked at as the woke generation or the snowflake generation or the cancel culture generation. It goes back to your it goes back to your point on sensitivity and entitlement, but do you think that there's a deeper wound that we're not addressing?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk to you as a therapist. I'm going to talk to you as a psychiatrist with kids who come to me with bullying issues, with absism, with sexism, with injustice, with hidden issues of prejudicial things, with physical and sexual abuse. Okay. Let's just talk through that. Okay. I hate the word cancel culture, first of all. I call it conscious culture. You know what your generation did? You're demanding accountability. My generation never demand. If we spoke up about something that was wrong, we would be shut down. Let's talk about sexual violence or physical violence or bullying or racism. There was no upbringing in the 80s and 90s big about that. The sexual assaults that happened by people who are my age who are coming out now, or people maybe in their 30s, that all happened when they were your age, but they're bringing it out now. Now it's considered cancel culture. But your generation saying, whoa, you guys went through all that? We're not accepting that. We hear someone did this. Okay, let's talk about why they did this. You can't bring them back into the real world like we used to, right? They have to go to jail if they've made a problem. They have to not be able to be a celebrity if they've done this. This is not acceptable to us anymore. You do not come back to society after you have done crime or created a crime. So so that's why I say you're demanding accountability. You're not demanding perfection, right? That's what I said before. You're demanding accountability. You're not canceling people, you're canceling harm. That's what I have looked over and over again, is that we're canceling those who are creating harm and who are saying this is harmful. And there's a difference, and it's a big one. So Gen Z has grown up in a world, right, that has so much pain and racism. And like I said, we had that too. But when we had it, was swept under a rug. It was hidden behind culture. It was being polite. Don't talk about it. It's going to be, and especially for a woman of immigrant parents and who comes from a culture that, oh my gosh, you don't talk about these things. You're flipping the script. You're not only flipping the script, you're turning on the lights. You're like, wake up, people, wake up. No, 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 we're not allowing this. This isn't too woke. This is being awake. Wake up. This is real world stuff that happens all around the globe. We're not just talking about the United States here, okay? You're told, or we were told as young age, not to speak up, right? Um, you guys use your voice. You advocate for things. What is right? Again, opinionated on both sides, right? I'm not going to say one side is wrong and the other side. The opinion that you have is your opinion, but it's right, but you're speaking up about it. I also think the adults who are egging on saying the fact that, oh, this side is saying this and this side is saying this, they're not actually listening to the two sides who have opposition, who are actually having a conversation. They're trying to tear you guys down by trying to separate you. When you guys are actually saying, hey, we're difference of opinion, but we're doing it eloquently and we're doing it with grace. Sometimes I think cancel culture moves too fast, but I think I'm just slow. So it moves too fast. We have to leave a little room for repair because mistakes can be made. Again, I'm not talking about things against the law, right? Now, I'm not talking about violent crimes. I always say, like, if someone drinks and drives, again, against the law, but you make a mistake and then you fix it. You get in a fight publicly. You're defending someone. You make a mistake, you fix it, right? We can repair things. I'm not talking about breaking the law. That is something totally different I'm talking about. And when I see this with your generation, there is a tendency to destroy someone. And I think that's a social media. But again, we're going to have people who do that in every generation, right? It doesn't matter. I think the desire for your generation is also to heal. That is what I've heard from my conversations is heal the truth, create boundaries, make real change. You're asking, how can we build something better if we don't hold the people in the systems accountable? Again, it goes back to accountability. That's what you're asking. How do we make it better if we don't do that? That is your guys' generation's question. And I said, that's not weakness. I'm going to repeat it again. That's wisdom. Because we didn't do that. That's smart. So instead of creating like a movement saying, oh, it's cancel culture or overreacting, I think adults should ask themselves, I'm talking about the older generation, should ask themselves, why did it take us so long for someone to say that? Why did someone have to come out with their abuse at 45 and 46? But kids nowadays are doing jujitsu to beat up people who are trying to kidnap them. I'm like, good for you, 9-year-old girl, beat the guy up. But why are kids in schools also saying, no, I'm not accepting this? You did not give this child a disciplinary action, so I'm going to go now to the school district. The principal didn't do anything. Sometimes I think schools are a little scared to keep the phones in the schools because they don't want to have all those, lawsuits. But that's my opinion. Again, I agree school phones should not be in classrooms because that's very specific. But then there should be better disciplinary actions too, So I think you're just the first generation. You're brave enough to do it, and you're saying it loudly. So that's a start. Something better.
There's two directions I want to go in now. I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think they both lead into each other, so that's fine.
Okay.
Um, this talk of destroying people, I think, is really an important thing to touch on. And not that it's so extreme that we want to destroy everybody. There is an aspect of Gen Z wanting to break the system down and rebuild it, but we can leave that aside. But one thing we talked about before is arrogance, right? There's a lot of arrogance with the generation on how we want to approach problems. What is that arrogance and how do we get out of that? Because there is a lot of, let's say, narcissism or ego with young people saying, we'll just figure it out. We don't need anybody. But We do need older generations. We do need that help.
Yeah, and so I want to make sure what you're asking me is correct. Is like, how do we have your generation get away from that label of narcissism and I can do it on my own? Right. Okay. So I think that really goes back to my point in them is if we as the older generation actually sit down and listen to them and not shut them down, I think you would have your generation be open to that conversation. But they're in constantly, well, look at it from your perspective. You're always told you're lazy, you can't do anything, you don't know what you're talking about, we know better than you, don't say anything. What are you going to do? Be like, yeah, I'm going to talk to you and listen to you? Because I don't think it's narcissism. I think it's like, what the hell? Like you're constantly putting me to, I mean, you beat someone down consistently, they're just going to look at you and say, peace, I'm going this way now. And then they get more of it. I don't think it's a generational thing. I think it's a human being thing. I think you have to give them an open space to have a conversation. So that's where listen to the kids comes in is listen to the youth, empower the youth, give them a mic. Then you, the adults, sit with them and take a mic too and start communicating. Because I think those labels were created by us, not by you. But why did we create those labels was because we didn't know how to have a conversation with you guys.
Dr. Z, this conversation is incredibly fresh, but it's incredibly intimidating because we don't really experience adults talking about us in such a positive light with such rigor and intensity. And to be honest, we can use a raw word, but happiness. And I guess this is the most friction that I'll have as a question, but why are you doing this? Is there an incentive on you for this? Or like, what is the purpose of this entire
Wow.
movement? And why are you here?
It's so personal. This is a whew. Okay, sorry. So I grew up, born and raised in Southern California. And it's very interesting because I grew up in a very cultural household, right? I grew up with a lot of cousins, a lot of boys in the house, very culturally South Asian. The girls had to do this and that. And there was a lot of things that happened physically, emotionally, mentally, personally to me. And I wanted to speak my voice a lot. First of all, I'm a very loud Punjabi, tall South Asian girl, which was always actually torn down too. It was like, my parents were like, don't be so loud, be so, demure and this and that. Now they use that as a TikTok thing. What is it? Demure, I'm this. My daughter has some shirt like that. But I recognize one thing. I had a lot to say. I had a lot to do. I wanted to become a person. I will tell you, this feeling of creating this, one, it came from when I had my children. Two, it came from the fact that when I decided to go into psychiatry and work with kids and having more and more conversations, I started remembering my youth. Now, if someone did listen to me, I don't know where I would be today. I'm not saying it was a great thing that no one did listen to me. But what I created here in this movement and this change that I want to make globally with adults listening is a generational change of communication. And why I'm saying that is we have so many children who are just waiting to create something. And if we give, we always say there's always this one or two or three or four, we could actually create thousands and thousands of youth to become those leaders, to become those corporates, to become change makers, to become decision makers, to become teachers, and actually give guidance to the next generations that have not even been born yet because we're changing the way we're communicating. I don't think that's answered your question because I know you want me to tell you why I'm doing this. I don't know why I'm doing this. I love doing this. I love communicating with kids. I love learning from you guys. I love giving you a platform so you don't have those same mistakes that we've had. And now you're not fighting for the generation behind you that is about to come. I don't need accolades. I don't need awards. I need change. And I want to do the change with you guys so I can help these adults understand and give you the right guidance. Remember, I also believe the older generation has great things that they've done that we can learn from. You have to learn from your past to obviously create a better future. That I do agree with. But I think we haven't given your generation a chance. There's so much blame and shame and putting you guys down that I'm like, I go sit and talk to you guys and I'm blown away by how much you teach us. And then if we come together, oh my God, how we could change them. I think that's just the reason I want to do it. And maybe selfishly for my own children and for kids that I know and that I've worked with, maybe that's another reason. But I think more or less, it's just I have always been a kid person. You know, I had a friend who was like, "Oh, you're such an expert in this and that. You'd be great at parenting expert." I'm like, "I'm not a parenting expert." First of all, I don't know. I hate that word. And for me personally, anybody else can use it. I'm a kid expert. I went to school to learn about the child's brain, the child's psychology, the child's physiology, and I wanted to be with the kids to understand the kids, to give the guidance to the parents on the kid, not on who they're parenting, not on who they're teaching, not who on they're mentoring. I want you to know what that kid wants. And I challenge adults. When was the last time you actually sat down unjudgmentally, being quiet, and sat down and listened to a kid? I think that's the reason I want to do it. It's just I want to make a change with kids.
I think you'll be hyper successful in that, and just because you don't want the accolades, you don't care for the accolades, doesn't mean the accolades won't find you. And we're gonna make that happen. So I'll ask you two questions. You can answer whichever one you want
Sure.
first. But what advice do you have for older generations, and what advice do you have for younger generations?
My advice for the older generation is not to be so close minded, to open up your mind and give the younger generation a chance and not think you know everything, and really to take a step back before you give advice and you have an expectation that you've already created. Not for them, but in general, you've created. Simultaneously, I would say to the younger generation, you also be open minded. You also don't be so close minded. But I also believe that the younger generation needs more people in the older generation to open doors for them. But then I will tell the younger generation, if you don't have those doors, tear them down yourself. Because there are going to be people out there who are going to support you. And don't give up. Dream what you want to dream, manifest what you want to manifest, believe in yourself, and don't give up. There's always going to be someone who's going to be there to support you.
Dr. Z, as you know, I'm not an expert at podcasting, so I'm always looking for places to grow and looking for more newer and interesting questions to ask guests. So you're actually the first guest I want to ask this, but we've had a brilliant conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything that we haven't touched on or any point that you would like to make towards the end of the episode that we haven't gotten to?
We talked about listening to the kids a little bit, and I think what I want to say is why it's so important. So we have parents who are going to Gen Zs and millennials who are going to become parents also, right? So like this is for anyone who is in the world of a child, right? Here's what I always want to say. If we want kids to listen to adults, adults have to show up with the listening look first. Okay? So yes, it's realistic if we're willing to grow up with our kids and not just raise them and guide them and be part of their lives. We need to be part of that, right? Now, this is hard, okay? Because a lot of adults don't have time. They're just like, I got this, I got that, I got this. But it's not impossible. Listening isn't about giving your kids all the power or any kid a power. It's about sharing it. So when we talk about schools, we talk about families, they can choose to change if they choose to. And a lot of adults are listening. I'm not saying they're not. We just need more to lean in and not lock them out. I think that really is the most important part, is why listening is so important. And you can edit that how you want.
If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be
Oh,
and why?
God. There's so many I want to do. Um, I think lately what I've been feeling, um, and I don't have a big social media platform, and I love what Miss Rachel's doing, and I wish I could support her and help her. I told my dad a long time ago, why did I want to be a physician? I actually wanted to be a pediatrician, and I wanted to go globally and help kids and feed the homeless. I mean, I come from that empathetic world that my parents, I'm Sikh, and that's like the giving part is really part of us. Um, right now, it would be really world hunger with children. We're seeing so much from Sudan to to Gaza right now, to kids within our own backyards. I don't understand how we have such wealthy world and children don't have food. That just doesn't comprehend with me. I think for me, it would be world hunger. It would be if I had a magic wand. I know that doesn't fall to listen to the kids, but if you're not feeding children, you're not growing the next generation. You're actually killing the next generation. And I think we have so many kids. I've seen kids in school 9 to like 18 years old who are like, we want to start programs to help kids around the world. And it's sad because the adults are shutting them down. I think right now, if you were talking right now, I think that's always been one of my things is to help, kids have meals,
And last but not least, what gives you hope in the world?
the youth.
This was just a fantastic episode. I do want to say thank you so much for being who you are and being on this mission and doing whatever you can in order to enact it. So where can we find you online? How do people find you and support you?
Yeah, we have so all of our social platforms for me is Dr. Z underscore MD. I'm on every platform, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I mean, you can name them all. And then we have Listen to the Kids, which is listen to the number two, listen to the kids.com, which is our website. And then we have all of the social platforms are the same with that as well.
Fantastic. And just so when people look at it, it's Dr. Z Z E E, not just C.
Yes, it's Dr. Z E E. Yeah, I love how you say Z. That's such a proper way to say it. So it's Doctors Z E E underscore MD. Yeah. And I would love any kid who is open to having a conversation and wants to be part of our programming, which is Listen to the Kids, who wants to give us a interview or a conversation about something that they're wanting to have work, even if it's personal or something globally. We are here to have these conversations, and then we will put it out there and we will make sure there's guidance for the adults based on what you need.
Dr. Z. All of those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Ayush. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.